Let's loom knit this honeycomb scarf. This is a squishy double knit scarf, so it's reversible on both sides. You can make it into a scarf or a cowl or an infinity scarf, which would be fun. And this particular one is made with 1 strand of yarn on an 11/16 gauge loom. This is just a worsted weight yarn. And I'm working with a V-shaped stitch, the traditional knit look, not that bumpy E-wrap look. So if you like that flat V shape, we're going to make that today. We're going to work on this 4-row repeat. I'm also going to show you how to cast it on and get the first couple of rows up and running and show you how to keep shifting this pattern over for this lovely honeycomb scarf. So once you have this pattern down, you can fly. Put it on any project that's double knit that you'd like. Let's begin. Welcome to GoodKnit Kisses. We're all about helping you stitch your love and love your stitches. For our free blog to the stitch pattern and also the pattern for the scarf, please click down below in the video description and get all of your supplies. Also, the right and left-handed video tutorial links are down below as well. For the materials, you're going to need a 12 peg loom. I'm using an 11/16 large gauge loom on this one with 12 pairs of pegs and my loom tool or loom hook. And you can use a worsted weight or medium 4 weight yarn on this. Just 1 strand will do. You need some scrap yarn for your anchor yarn and a crochet hook for finishing it off and a tapestry needle for weaving in your tails. So grab your supplies and we'll begin with our cast on. Let's look at our loom. We've got 12 pairs of pegs, and this top part up here is our upper board and the lower part here is our lower board. And this peg over here is going to be called peg 1, and down all the way at the end is peg 12. So if I say lower peg 1, we're talking about this part. If I say upper peg 1, we're talking about this part up here. Okay, so we're going to start by placing a slip knot on our anchor peg here, or if you have a peg on the outside, or just hold it somewhere to get this all started. We're going to start by a slip knot, however you like. I wrap mine around my first finger a couple times, take the back loop over the front a little bit, and then the next back loop up and over the tip of your finger and making that knot. Make it however you like. Pause your video if you need to in here. You can fast forward or rewind if you need, or push slow. So I put it on my anchor peg. And now just for the first pass on our cast on row, the cast on is actually 2 rows down and back, but the first row only is the only time in this pattern that we're going to E-wrap. You can also do a couple of other cast ons on here, but you have to do, for this one, I'm following the pattern that I'm going to show you for the remainder of it, so it's easier to remember. It's just that you just E-wrap this first time. So we're going to E-wrap around peg 1 on the lower board. So we're going to go inside here and around the outside and back in, so you have that little E-wrap shape. And then we're going to go to peg 1 on the upper board and do the same thing, E-wrap. And now we're going to go to the next peg, which is peg 2 on the upper board, and E-wrap. And then we're going to go straight down to the lower board and E-wrap peg 2. And you can see how it makes this open box here. So the box is open at the front or on the lower part. And now we're going to E-wrap around peg 3 on the lower. And then we're going to go to the upper part up here and wrap on peg 3 up here. So now we have an open box at the top up here. Okay. So we're going to just continue in this pattern all the way down where we have a pair of pegs on each side and we just alternate. E-wrapping on this row only. Make sure you're not doing it too tight. Okay, we're going to all the way down to 12 on the upper and then down around 12 on the lower. Okay, so that's our first pass. You can push your yarn down a little bit. Okay, and on the instructions, oops, that dropped off, so let's fix this again. Here we go. So if you look at our double rib cast on instructions, we just did numbers 1 through, let's see, 8. And then we're going to lay our anchor yarn, so you can kind of wrap around this little anchor peg for a second, put it down, and then get your scrap yarn of your another color, contrasting color, and lay this in. You're just going to put it down in between this first peg here and lay it across, and at the end put that through. There we go. And you can have it long and tie it together if you like. I'm just using this as a little example. I have it longer on my much bigger sample. I usually don't cut it so short. Okay, so got to fix that last stitch. It came off. All right, so now we've done steps 1 through 9, and we're going to cast on row 2. This is step 10. From here, we're not going to E-wrap. We're just going to lay our yarn loosely across the front of the peg as if to flatten it. So we're going to guide the yarn around the back of the peg, back of this peg, and straight up to peg 12 on the upper board. Okay, so we're just wrapping peg 12 on the upper board. And then we go around peg 11 on the upper board and then come down to peg 11 on the lower board. So let me hold that, and you can see it's just on top of it. So we're following this same wrapping pattern with these little boxes, keeping them open on the same sides and closed on the other side. So I'm calling these two closed here. So go all the way down and just follow the pattern. You're just not E-wrapping. Okay, so once you have your final one on, you're going to knit over, knit the loop over, bottom over top, and lock that in. Okay, and then all of your pegs, like this one had 2, all of them have 2 loops except for this last peg here on peg 12. So go ahead and knit these over. And I suggest whenever you're knitting over in this pattern that you start at the opposite. Like once you lock this one in, go the opposite where the working yarn is and start at the end of this pattern so that it doesn't get too tight on you. So I'm going to knit over this pair, and then I'm going to knit over this pair here together. Because if I start at this other end, it tends to get really tight about here, and it makes the last several pegs harder to knit over, or at least it does for me. So if you find that, just start knitting it that way. So pause your video if you need. Okay, so this one came off. So this had an E-wrap. So I'm going to hold on to these. I'll just show you a little troubleshooting since it happened to me. I'm just going to put this to the back and E-wrap it right back around. Okay, and then lay this on top. And there it goes. I can go ahead and knit that over. So crisis averted. You don't have to redo it if that happens. So I'm glad it happened on camera. Okay, so we're going to do the setup rows. So after we've cast on, where's the setup row peg 1, on the lower board, we're slipping. So that means you skip it. You don't actually work it. And we're going to wrap around pegs 1 and 2 on the upper board, like that. And then wrap around pegs 2 and 3 on the lower board. And then we just alternate, whoops, sorry, hit the camera. Just alternate and continue in this wrapping pattern. I'm just following what we did the row before. Okay, so all the way down to the end, toward working our way towards peg 12. And wrap that last peg 12 and knit over. I didn't have a good handle on it. Hold on a second. There we go. All right, and as I said before, once you lock that in, it's best to come down here to the opposite side and knit off. Okay, so pause your video, meet me back up for row 2. See you in a moment. Okay, so row 2, we're going to be slipping the first peg as we did before, and we're on peg 12. We're going to work our way all the way back to peg 1. So it's a continuation of this. This is the last time our rows are going to be lining up like this. We're going to be shifting every other row once we start our 4-row repeat. So the beginning of our next row is actually going to be the beginning of the 4-row repeat. So be sure and pay extra attention. Row 1 and 3 are not the same, but rows 3 are the start of our row repeat. Okay, so we're going to knit over that and go ahead and knit over all of your stitches. Pause your video and I'll meet you back up for the beginning of our honeycomb stitch pattern, which is row 3. See you in a moment. Okay, so the honeycomb stitch pattern is that 4-row repeat, and it actually has 2 wrapping sequences. So we're actually going to offset at the beginning of each of the sequences. So row 3, we're going to offset this pattern, and wrapping sequence 1 begins with row 3 and it comes down to peg 12, and then row 4 goes down back down to peg 1 again. And then when we get to rows 5 and 6, it's just going to offset again. So at the beginning of these things, when they're offset, we're not slipping a stitch because we have to change up how it sets up. So what we're going to do now is, instead of making these little open boxes at the front of the board here on this lower board, we're going to make it on the upper board. So what you do is you're going to come from this lower board. You've got your yarn here. We're going to go to the upper board at peg 1, wrap around and come back down to peg 1 here, and then over to peg 2, and then up to peg 2 up here. And it's closed on the lower board and open up at the top. So let me show that again close up. So we're going to come from peg 1 on the lower, we're going to go up to the upper board and around, back down to 1 again. So from 1 lower, we're coming to the upper 1, down to the lower 1, and across to lower 2, and up to lower 2, up to peg 2. So across to peg 3, down to lower peg 3, and across. So we're doing a pair on the lower and a pair on the upper, and so on. So it's basically the same thing you did before, except you're not slipping a stitch. Come all the way down until you get to peg 12, and then you'll end up here instead of down at the bottom. And then go ahead and knit over, and all of your pegs should have 2 loops. Of course, I just knitted that one off. We can come down here, and where I have that first stitch, we can loop that up and over, and then start doing all of our pairs, knitting off like that. Okay, so go ahead and do that. Pause your video, and I'll meet you back for row 4. See you in a moment. Okay, so we're on row 4, and we need to come back down to peg 1. And if you remember, we had this open at the back end here, because once you start alternating them, when you're halfway through that part, you can't really tell. You might go, I really can't tell, Kristen, like where that open box is. Okay, first, just look at the last 2 you did. This will be looser on this end, and see how this is tighter over here. This is the part you're just going to be following back. So we need to make this part an open box. So we're just coming down and around. You are slipping on this row. This is the only row when you're on this side over here. This row is the only time when you come back this way that you do not work that first peg. So slip these rows here. Okay, so all your even rows are going to be slipped. The first stitch. So just follow that pattern along, and then come up to the back again and lock that stitch in and start knitting over your stitches. Okay, So continue knitting over. Pause your video. I'll meet you back for the wrapping sequence 2, which is row 5. See you in a moment. Let's do wrapping sequence 2, row 5, and I wanted to show you my other loom, which has a lot more of the yarn on it. It's already knit up to my right length, but I wanted you to see what that wrapping pattern looks like when you've gotten further down. It looks really identical. You can see that it's open at the back at the end of that sequence, and we're ready to begin row 5. Okay, and I'll show you on both of these so you can have that repetitive part. So we're wrapping around our lower peg 1 here and going up to peg 1 on the upper, and coming around peg 2 and coming down to the lower, leaving that part open and going to our next pair. So we're just remembering, okay, we're going to do a pair on the upper, pair on the lower, and just do 2 at a time all the way down, just as you've been doing. There we go. And knitting that over. All right, so that is row 5. Let's repeat row 5 again, just so you can see it. So I'm coming down to 1, up to 1, across to 2, down to 2, across to 3. So we've done a pair down here, and we're going to do a pair up, a pair down, a pair up, a pair down, pair up, pair down, pair up, pair down, and up, and then down and around peg 12 and knit that off. Okay, so that's it for row 5. Pause your video, work that row, and I'll see you for row 6. All right, we are ready for row 6. Again, we are slipping this peg because we're coming from this side down to the other. So come around the back, or the upper, do that pair, and do the pair up front. So we've slipped that first stitch. Remember, this part right here is going to be open. And just keep going down. I know I moved my working hand on you. I flipped it around on you. Okay, so go ahead and knit that off and do that row just like that. And when you're done, and I'll just talk while you're knitting up your stuff, you're knitting off. I've already come down to here and worked this last row for you. You can see it's already down at the end, and you can see how that's going to end. And you're going to continue working on those stitch patterns. Just continue shifting it over. Remember, when you begin and you shift it, you've got to come across from where the working yarn is and then come back to where you began, and then you can start your pairs. That's really what it is. So when you're on this side, you're going to come across and then down, or vice versa, depending upon which end you're in. So you just go across from your working yarn, wrap around that peg, and come back to where you were, and then you start on that pair. So that might be an easier way for you to think about that every time you're on this side of the loom. And when you're on the other side of the loom, you're just slipping. So continue that until you have your desired length. I'm doing about 60 inches, might even go a little further than that if you are taller. And to bind off, we do have instructions on that. We have the bind off instructions, and we also have finishing the cast on end. If you already know how to do that, then you won't need that. I'll show you a little bit of it here. So for binding off, you're just going to use a crochet hook, and you pick up the stitch on the last peg opposite to where your working yarn is. So if you're on this end and you get to the right length, then go ahead and do that. And you're going to come to the opposite end, which is this stitch here. It's the same side, but I mean, it's on the other end of the loom. And you just pick that last peg up, and you're just going in reverse order of how your pattern is. So you're just going to pick up that next peg on the pair across from it, and then loop it on through, and then go to the next one in that sequence and pull on through. Same thing, come here and pull through, and just keep going until you get down to the end. and I'll show you what when I loop that one through. So you're just going all the way until you run out of stitches on the pegs, and you're just going to pull through that last loop, and I'll show you what that looks like here in a second. Okay. All right, I've got 2 pegs or 2 loops left. I'm going to head and put that on my crochet hook, pull through, and then take my tail and pull that through. I've gone ahead and cut off a nice long tail and pull it all the way through and take it off my loom. And then I've got it complete. And then I'm just going to take my tail and weave that into my knitting. And if you want, you could add on some fringe here or something if you like. And then you're going to want to finish off this beginning end, and depending upon how you did your cast on, if you did it the way I did, it might look a little bit different. I actually tried this is my test one, and I did it with like a cross stockinette. You just can't do it in the wind it in the main way that I did it without doing an E-wrap. So yours might look a little different from mine. Either way, it's fine. But what you do is you go the opposite side of this tail here. So you'll be coming to this stitch here and going through 2 loops, or pick up 2 loops on top of your contrast yarn and pull through, and then go to the next loop and pull through, go to the next loop and pull through, and the next loop and pull through, and just continue on. I go ahead and sometimes take out that accent or that contrasting yarn. Here we go. Let's go ahead and pull that on through so you can see what it looks like. You can see how it's lining up nice. And then we'll go to the next one and just continue on until you run out of loops. And again, you can put fringe on the end here, or you can sew your ends together if you're completing it as a loop, like in a cowl or an infinity scarf. Pull out more of that. You can see how nicely that's coming along. And then these last few stitches here. And these ones are a little bit harder to see. That's why I kind of like to have my yarn pulled out, because I like to kind of pull up on it and I can tell which stitches it's coming through. So let's see, pull up a little bit. It looks like the first one is this one, so we're going to grab it. Just pick up whichever one looks like it's next. And this next loop. And then the last loop. There we go. You can pull out that remaining yarn, contrasting yarn, and get your last loop, or the tail, pulled through, and then just weave in your tail. Well, I hope you enjoy learning this stitch pattern today and get this pattern. Be sure and go down below to get it all in its written form. I'd love to hear from you soon, or tag me with your project on Instagram at GoodKnit Kisses. We'll talk soon. Have a great day. Happy knitting.
Thanks for joining us today, where we help you stitch your love and love your stitches. See you again soon.